Software development requires a lot of feedback, not only from customers, from product people, from yourself, from your code, and every kind in between. Today on the Product Driven podcast, we're interviewing Ashley Davis, who wrote a brand new book about the feedback-driven software developer. And you know what the most important feedback is? About what to build. Check out today's episode. To survive and thrive, you must adopt a product-driven mindset. And we're back for another episode of Product Driven. This is your host, Matt Watson. Today, excited to be joined by author Ashley Davis, who has published Bootstrapping Microservices and has a brand new book called The Feedback Driven Developer, which will be published later this year. Ashley, welcome to the show, man.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks for having me. Really good to be here.
I guess my first question for you is how does it feel to be an author of tech books? As somebody who's also authoring the Product Driven book, what is it like to be an author?
It's pretty awesome to have the finished product in your hands and know that, so many years of work have gone into that. Kind of like when you kind of ship a software product as well, you kind of feel that same sort of, oh, I did that, I built that, and you feel very proud of that.
So what gave you the idea to write the book about the feedback-driven developer?
I wanted to write a book that was more about the development process and how to be effective at it. And I'd read books like that. I've got one on my shelf behind me called Rapid Development from the early 90s. So books that were really influential on my career. And after going on 30 years of me being a developer, I wanted to kind of basically write about what I'd learned and what I thought was needed to go into an effective development process. And I think it comes at a good time as well, because obviously a lot of us are working remotely now as well. So a lot of the things that kind of have been learnt for this book and sort of filtered through my brain, I learnt them, in my early formative years as a software developer, as I was kind of skilling up. And in those times, obviously, I was working in an office full time, had all the people around me who I could learn from, be mentored by, and I do get a little bit worried that people don't have that anymore. So I hope this book can kind of fulfill a role there as well, helping junior mid developers, help them get started and really understand what's the heart of an effective development process.
Well, and when you say feedback, that can mean a lot of different things, right? Is that, feedback from the customer? Is that feedback from the QA team? Is it feedback from a peer? So when you think about feedback, I guess in the terms of your book, which of those is the one that you're focused on the most?
Yeah. I'm mostly talking about kind of personal feedback loops that a developer can use in their own in their own coding process, basically.
Okay.
Before they're handing over the software to whoever's getting it. It might be their lead programmer or a product owner or a customer. Someone is at the end of that kind of product pipeline waiting for features. You're coding them. Obviously, there's multiple levels of feedback that are very important and crucial. And usually we're as teams and as companies, we're pretty good at kind of putting software in front of people and getting the feedback and then making course corrections. That's what Agile is all about. Obviously, coding in iterations, of doing development in iterations, and assessing the result and doing course corrections to get to further quickly hone in on hopefully what the customer wants. But I think there's a lot we can do as well in our own kind of personal development work, before we even commit our code changes. So, we can be thinking about what we're doing before we're doing it. We can be coding to a plan. It's a bit like doing test-driven development, except it doesn't necessarily need to be automated. It just requires that you think ahead what you're doing and making, decisions basically on what you're going to prioritize, what things you're going to ignore. Because a big part of being a fast developer is learning, what not to touch.
It's about trade-offs.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. I mean, fundamentally, being a good software developer is about understanding trade-offs. Why am I doing this thing? Why am I not doing that thing? And we have to do that all day long.
But once you've done that, it's then do something, assess the result, get the feedback. Am I still doing the right thing? Am I still heading in the right direction? Have I done it the right way? Have I misunderstood something? I think we can spend so long heading in the wrong direction, and that's one of the biggest wastes of time in the software industry, is that you can kind of code for hours or days in the wrong direction as a developer, and not realize that you got the interpretation wrong of what you were supposed to do, and you should have, sought feedback. And that starts with just yourself. It starts with just kind of looking at what you've done and assessing whether that kind of meets, what you're aiming at. And then, before you kind of let it go off into the distance, rolling on, go and check with someone whether you're still on the right track, whether you're doing it the right way. And obviously, as you kind of rise up in kind of, I guess, experience, you'll kind of make better and better decisions about what you're doing and the direction you're heading. But especially in those early years when you've got less experience, I think, the more feedback from outside, the better. And as you get more experience, you're probably going to tend towards more internal feedback. So more looking at what you're doing and assessing it yourself, because obviously you've got that experience of doing that a lot. And you kind of, I think you can go a lot further with that before you kind of reach out and kind of, use the time of your colleagues and your customers.
Well, let me ask you this. So to me, the most important feedback is understanding, am I working on the right thing?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what tips do you have for that part of it?
Yeah, so it depends how you're working. I mean, you might have a list of user stories delivered to you. I don't know, or you might be a developer that in a startup that's got access to a customer. So there's different ways of going about it, but ultimately you're given something from someone, and you've got to assess, like, what in there is the most important thing to deliver first, and then second, and then third, and then so on. So prioritization is very important. And if you don't feel confident in doing that, have a go at it. Just prioritize your list, and then go to whoever it is, your manager or your customer, and say, is this the right prioritization? Is this the right order?
To me, that's the first level of feedback, right? Like, and to your point earlier, like, you can spend hours and days working on the wrong thing. If you don't get this feedback first,
Yep.
almost none of the rest of them matter, right? Like, this is the most important one.
The other thing that comes into it that I think is really, really important, and it's right up the front, chapter 1 of the book, is you're not just prioritizing by value. You're also got to factor in the cost to deliver it, the cost to build it.
The effort.
So there's another trade-off, another balancing act there.
Yeah.
Where, so obviously, if you've got something that you've said is, I don't know, moderate value, and you can deliver that in a day or two, that's obviously going to be a higher priority than something that's extremely valuable, and then you say, oh, that's really hard, that's going to take like a month to deliver.
Yeah.
Not that you should be working that way. You should be breaking these things down into less than a month, obviously. But that idea of like value over cost to deliver is the metric that you should use for prioritization, not just value.
Well, what are your thoughts though on, okay, I get a work item, I know I'm going to work on this project, maybe it's a project that takes a week, about getting feedback about how are we going to build this, how should we think about building this, how is this going to impact the user, like what decisions do I need to make about, how this is going to work, like that part of the feedback.
Yep. I mean, so nothing beats a prototype. I mean, even before that, I mean, you can draw diagrams, you can talk it through, you can do wireframes, mock-ups of front ends and stuff like that. But nothing beats a prototype. Actually building something as quickly as possible. You don't care about the quality of the code because you're going to throw it away. And then using that as almost like a conversation starter, or as like a learning, a way to learn about how you could build what you want to build. And you can give that to colleagues, or you can give that to your customer to have a look at, talk through it. It might not work properly. It doesn't have to work properly. It doesn't have to be complete. It just has to answer some questions. At the beginning of any software project, you've got a list of questions. Some of them are easy, some of them are hard. The hard ones you have to kind of test the hard way. You might call it like an MVP in startup world. That's what we call it, minimum viable product. So it's whatever you can do to kind of assess whether a bit of technology or a bit of product is actually going to work for its intended audience.
Well, so in the product-driven book, the big thing that I talk about is I describe it as clarity. And I love referring to clarity as kind of the fuel of software development, because as a developer, if you don't know what you're building and why you're building it, and you don't have all that clarity, you get stuck at every turn, right? You're like, oh no, I
Yeah.
got to go ask somebody. I got to wait for stand up. I got to talk to the product manager. I got to talk to another developer or whoever, right? And
Yeah.
that getting that sort of feedback as I would describe some of it is clarity, right? Of like, what are we building? Why are we building it? How are we building it? Like all of this sort of information, I think is really critical. So when a software developer does go like heads down to go do their
Mm.
work, they know what they're doing, right? Like they've gotten
Yeah.
all the feedback and all the clarity that they need, so they know what they actually need to go do and don't get stuck every
Yep.
every hour, right?
Yep. But that's okay as well. I mean, as you're working through that, even if you think you've got clarity, it's so
You need more.
uncertain. Yeah, like at every step of the way, you might need
Yeah.
more, and you, again, you don't want to kind of get an hour into it. And so I would always encourage software developers on my teams to come to me, whenever they had a problem. Like, they don't have to wait till the next day or whatever. Like, whenever you have something you need clarity on, come to me. And if I can't answer that, we'll go out to someone who can. So if you're a software developer, it's don't ever think clarity's locked in, because I don't think it ever is.
No.
I think you should always be seeking it, and that's part of the feedback theme is always be seeking that clarity, always be looking for the answers to your questions. But I mean, I think you've worked in startups. I've worked in startups. You have to be comfortable in a really uncertain, chaotic world to thrive in a startup. And I think that's going to be true of development houses everywhere, if not now, in the future. That you're just going to be surrounded by uncertainty about like what's required, what's going to move a customer, and so it's going to be harder and harder, I think, to get clarity
So
in a changing world.
yeah, and that's a key theme in the product driven book is historically software engineering has been the bottleneck, right? Like we have invented so many different practices and agile and QA and product managers, all these different things to help software engineering go quicker, right? Like we worked all the way around them to try and help them go quicker. But if AI changes it, so software engineering goes faster, all of a sudden that bottleneck is moving, right? It's going to move more and more to how fast the product decision making can happen. And
Yep.
that is going to change everything. Like now,
Yep.
my personal feeling is like software developers have to think a lot more like product owners. There's got to be more product thinking. They got to have more
Yep.
ownership in the work that they're doing. Otherwise, they're constantly going to be blocked, waiting on somebody else telling them what to do.
Yep. No, I think AI is great. It's moving quickly. There's a lot of problems with it at the moment, but you can already see the potential of how fast it's going to help us move. And the problem with moving fast is that moving fast in the wrong direction
Yeah.
is counterproductive. And so if you're giving all your developers AI and saying move at 100 miles an hour,
Yeah.
like where are they going exactly?
They make a lot of assumptions, working on the wrong things, creating technical debt, breaking things, refactoring things, whatever.
They'll
That
be effectively cut loose to go in the wrong direction. So
yeah.
I think thinking around the product side of things is going to be more and more important for developers. More and more, I mean, for at least a decade now, I thought it's been important for developers to really dive into their domain, understand the domain of the business that they're in, and try and understand their customers as much as they can, as much as they've got access to them. I think that's just going to be more and more widespread.
I definitely think so with AI is shifting that. To your point, I think the best developers have always done that, right? The best developers, you ask them to do something, they logically stop and are like, why am I doing this? Is there a better way? What if we don't do this, right? Like you and I may naturally think that way, but a lot of people don't, or they work in an environment where
Yep.
maybe they weren't allowed to, right? They're like, I just do this work. It needs to be done by the end of the week. Go.
Yep.
Don't ask any questions. Just go. Don't stop this train. Don't just go. Right. Like, but, and it feels like that's the way a lot of really large companies work. Like everything is just like this giant train of work that just keeps sprinting and nobody can slow it down to really ask like, what are we doing?
Yeah, I think the problem in big companies, I mean, communication is going to be an issue. Like, I mean, you've got to have someone communicate the clarity and maybe train the developers to ask for that as well. But also, I find that one reason I like working in startups is because there's less bureaucracy, less process, and more just getting value out to the customer. And at bigger companies, I find there's more of this kind of like what I'm calling process theater.
It's
where
like friction, a lot of friction.
the act of going through the process is almost more
Yeah.
important than delivering value. And so, but you're doing that, you're constantly going through the process, even though maybe you're not delivering much value or delivering much code or whatever. So it looks like you're working, but there's not, it's just not refined to get the value in the hands of customers, which is what you have to do as a small company or as a startup to survive. Is you have to be really focused on that, what the customer needs, and delivering that value.
Yeah, a great example of this is a company I sold 14 years ago, and their product has barely changed. It's the number one company in their space. They've got hundreds of employees, thousands of customers. That product has not changed.
Yep.
Is AI going to help them change it faster? Nope, not at all. Their problem, it's all a culture
Yep.
problem, right? These big
Yep.
companies, AI is not even going to help them. They have so many culture, organizational friction, process problems
Yep.
that AI is not even going to help. It's not going to help at all.
Another big company problem I've seen, which I think you just described with that company, is that there's like a massive machinery in place to preserve the status quo
Yeah.
and to keep, obviously they've got investments to protect, and that's, something that they have to do. But at some point, I feel like that becomes so intense that it almost, that maybe that's what stifles the innovation in big companies. They've got no room to move because they're trying to protect what they've got aggressively.
Yeah, everybody's trying to protect their little fiefdom, protect their own job, which makes sense, which, I understand, but to some degree, it almost sounds like government jobs too.
Yeah.
So tell us more about, in the book, do you cover also about getting feedback from the customer?
A little bit. I sort of allude to that. So it's mostly about building the feedbacks into your own development loop, into your own development process. I think it's chapter 6 where we talk about going to production. So I'm a big believer in going to production as early as possible, and having automated deployment. So I don't think you should automate everything, or I think you should be very careful what you automate. But automated deployment is always kind of like feature number one for me, because that is the conduit to the customer. That is the pipeline. So we talk a little bit about that in the book, and how that, a process basically for delivering updates to the customer. And you need to be able to do that reliably and without fear, in order to be able to kind of, get software into the hands of customers. I mean, I'm talking about like web development here, not kind of mobile app development, something like that. But if you've got a pipeline for getting an updated kind of web app to your customer, I think that's one of the fastest ways to kind of ship product and get feedback. And that's one of the things we definitely talk about in the book.
So in your book, do you also talk about getting feedback from production in regards to like application performance and errors and logs and all that kind of stuff?
No, it's not quite that.
That's critical feedback.
You want to know that
How
your
is
code
my
works?
software performing in production?
Yep. No, I think logging and monitoring, and grander scale, more huge scale kind of software is what I talk about in Bootstrapping Microservices. So there's a couple of points in the book where I say, like, if you want to know how to scale this up, if you want to know how to deploy a bigger version of this, you want to use Kubernetes, Docker Kubernetes stuff, technologies like that, Bootstrapping Microservices. That's the book where I explain a lot of that kind of high scale, performance orientated stuff. The feedback driven developer, I guess it's more kind of, it's demonstrated using a particular set of technologies, but it's more technology agnostic. It's more about the process and the thinking and the flow of development, really from kind of knowing nothing to kind of through prototyping, then through kind of actual kind of production development, through to kind of where you're ready to do an investment in something like test-driven development, which I think is a very heavy investment. You've got to be very careful where you deploy it, but can also be a crucial way to kind of automate checking of software and getting feedback. Production deployment, talk about debugging and testing your code and how to prevent errors going to production. So it's still all mostly focused on what happens on your development computer.
Okay.
Almost before you commit, before you push, with a lot of kind of links to kind of stuff that people already know about, getting peer feedback and monitoring and logging in production. I think it's easy to find information on that sort of stuff. So I touch on some things like that, but I don't go into detail on anything that's, I feel like is overdone elsewhere.
So, I guess in the context of your book, what would you say is like the number one thing, or the number one thing or number one mistake that maybe engineers make that was kind of like an aha moment in your book?
Mm. I think for me, the aha moment was actually realizing that feedback was at the core of it, because I had the principles already. It's, make sure the code is valuable, balance value versus cost to deliver, make sure your code is working, make sure you've got, you're basically building in iterations where you've got spaces for thinking and reflection. And then I sort of didn't realize until after I'd been writing for 3 years that the core underlying powering mechanism of that was feedback. And so that provided a really nice narrative to kind of tie all the principles and the processes of the book together into something cohesive. So that was an aha moment for me. I see developers all the time who are kind of like pushing code to production that's broken. It's like not tested. And I'm like, okay, like, stuff that is a basic habit for me, like that I do every day, I feel like it can be lacking. And I hope some people can really learn from this. I think the number one thing that you can do to write better code is self-review. Before you commit, pretend you're doing a peer review of yourself, go through your code, explain it to yourself, make sure you understand it. You will absolutely spot errors that way. It's a bit like rubber ducking. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Back in the day,
Yeah, I think I've heard of that before.
it's like an urban legend. You put a rubber duck on top of your computer, and you explain your code to the rubber duck, and all of a sudden, you can see the problems in your code. You can understand the problems as if someone else had explained it to you. So just reading your code out and explaining your code out, maybe not. You don't have to actually talk aloud. Do it in your mind. Have a conversation with yourself. That's just such an effective way to spot problems, and save embarrassing mistakes going from your code into production, and to really respect your colleagues as well, because you don't want them to waste time finding your embarrassing problems that you could easily find yourself. So self-review, probably number one tip. I do have one more actually. I almost make a joke in the book that the fastest code that you can possibly write is the code that you don't write. So
Yeah.
if you can kind of really try hard to choose what not to do, like have a no list. Like it's the code that you don't write, because there's an infinite amount of that, right? There's an infinite amount of code that you're not going to write. If you choose to just discard that and just not even spend time on that feature, or that even if you're looking at multiple products, don't even spend time on the products that aren't going to work. So it's like choosing ahead of time to not waste time on the stuff that's not going to be valuable, I think is really important as well.
What are your thoughts on developers QAing their own code?
Oh,
Where is that in your feedback?
yeah, it's like right up there in my mantra: keep the code working, keep it working. It's like a game to always keep the software intact. Basically, once you check out your code from Git or whatever you're using, and you should test it. Ideally, automated tests, although they're not necessarily appropriate for early stage startups. But if you've got automated tests, run them. Do a run through of your test plan if you have one. Make sure it's all working before you start your day's work, and then write a bit of code, test it. Write a bit of code, test it. So it's this really tight feedback cycle where you're kind of writing the code. In all my development pipelines, I use live reload, so the application restarts straight away with the new code. If I have automated tests for a particular thing, the automated tests will automatically run. So, and normally I'm working with like at least two screens. So, I can be coding on one screen, I can have tests running on another screen. So it's like instant feedback if you've got your development pipeline set up the right way, as to whether the changes are working. Don't necessarily have to use test-driven development. But for many years, I was indoctrinated in that religion and thought it was the only way to go. I'm beyond that phase now, fortunately, but I still have it sort of ingrained in my head and in my habits, in that even if I'm not writing automated tests, which, it's a rarity these days, working for startups, having the luxury to be able to have, to be validated enough to invest in that level of infrastructure. But I do it in like a way that I call manual TDD, which is like where you're kind of, at least you're thinking through what you're going to do and how you're going to test it before you write the code. Another step beyond that is to write down a test plan before you write any code, before you write any feature. Write down a test plan, and then it's kind of like it's just like thinking through your testing before you start coding, and then it's just that tight feed loop: code test, code test. To the best of your ability, it should always be working. Whenever you have working code that's useful, commit. put a really good commit message on it. I call it putting working code in the bank. So code test commit, code test commit. And if you can work that way, you're building up a very complex product eventually. All software is going to get complex eventually. You're building up a very complex product, but you're doing it through simple, easily testable steps. So that's one of the advantages.
Let me ask you this: you wrote a book about microservices. Who do you recommend to actually use microservices?
Yeah, it's not recommended for startups at all. I mean, I've used microservices on multiple startups and it's been fine because, I have the level of skill to know what I'm doing, to be able to know when microservices are gonna help more than they cost. And that's what it boils down to with any technology, any process, any technique you use, any even language or any framework you use, anything you use has got to deliver more than it costs you. And microservices will come into their own in complexity management when you have a complex problem, like to break down because each microservice is simple, right? Very simple. And a programmer or a small team can understand a microservice and rewrite a microservice easily. So it's designed for managing complexity. It's designed for breaking up complexity into small and simple parts. But most, small startups, like small development teams, don't have the problem that microservices is going to solve.
No, they don't.
So you've got to have.
It's also like adopting a bunch of puppies.
I mean, even if you had a product where microservices can help, right? But if you don't have the level of skill in your development team to manage that, it's going to turn into a huge complex nightmare. So if you've got to have the need for it, where it's going to help you more than it hurts you. And you've got to have, skilled developers at a level who can deal with it.
Knows how to manage it.
And then microservices are great. But, my book, Bootstrapping Microservices, it was never really intended to kind of, convince anyone that microservices were the right way to go. It's that once you know that they're the right way to go, it's how do you do them properly and how do you do them in a cost-effective way. And I've used microservices for startups, and it's worked out perfectly fine. So in the right circumstances, they help. In the wrong circumstances, they can hurt. Just like any technology,
like everything else.
Sharp edge.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. Again, this was Ashley Davis, author of Bootstrapping Microservices. You have a new book coming out later this year, Feedback-Driven Developer. Ashley, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. And the book's in the early access program is open now, so you can buy it now. Get the first 3 chapters, and new chapters are being delivered like every month or two until.
And where do they find that?
Go to manning.com and search for the feedback-driven developer. But there's a link, hopefully, you can put in the show notes, and a discount for your listeners as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Before we wrap up today's episode, we have a special resource for you if you're looking to elevate your development team to have more of a product-driven mindset. I have a fantastic free ebook about turning your code-first team into a product-first team. Please go to fullscaleteam.com/product-first-teams to download this free ebook. There's also a link in the show notes. Thanks for listening to Product Driven, and we'll see you in the next episode.